Hey everybody, Chris Liepe here.
Spencer Sotelo here, and I'm going to show you how I learned how to scream.
Just fire me, learn to obey, sensing is the only way!
If you want to go way deeper with your screaming with Spencer, click the link below for his free warm-up routine.
Spencer's warm-ups for total destruction.
Such a good name. When was the first time you discovered what screaming was and how it felt?
So driving to work, when I was 16, 17, that was really the only time I had to discover my voice, on that 15, 20-minute drive to work every day. And it was listening to artists like AFI, Davey Havok, Burt McCracken from The Used, and trying to emulate them in the car. And I could sound stupid on my own, and it was fine. I don't have to worry about anyone making fun of me or my parents hearing me and thinking I'm freaking crazy. It was really just driving to work. That was like my special time, for discovering my voice.
So you grew up in an environment where if you were screaming like that, your family members and stuff, they would have nothing to do with it.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, very, very religious family. And even if they knew what kind of music I was listening to, without me even screaming myself, they would have reamed me out,
Right. So you had to make use of the car.
Yeah.
Because you lived in those close quarters.
Yeah, that was like my safe space for the kind of music I wanted to listen to, the kind of stuff I wanted to be singing to.
And what was the sound that you started to make with your voice where you discovered, this is it? Like, I think this is going to lead somewhere.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because it sounded like a dying cat, when I first started trying to do it, and that's like the term you use in all your videos, that breaking point between that head and falsetto voice to where it starts to break up, and you find that breaking point. And when I first discovered that I could start doing that, that's what led me into, being able to talk words or say words with that technique and get more and more comfortable with that. And, like I said, being in the car, because it sounds stupid, man, but when there's nobody else around, you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
You can do it as much as you want.
Yeah. So how did you stumble on that sound? Just by experimenting?
By experimenting.
And by listening to some of your other...
Trying to emulate them, trying to emulate Burt McCracken, trying to emulate Corey Taylor, all these different types of voices. And like those two singers that I just used right now as an example, they're vastly different. Their screams sound nothing alike. But I was trying to emulate all these different singers, and that's why I have such a wide arsenal of sounds with my screaming. It's like different characters coming in. And I was telling Chris the other day, it's like a movie. If you have one actor or two actors in a movie, it's going to be super boring. But if you bring all these other actors that have all these different character traits, that's how I kind of look at a song and singing. It's like you want to bring all these characters in, and that creates the dialogue. That's
makes you loose, too.
Entertaining, yeah.
Right, because you're not going for one particular sound. You have a wide variety of sounds you can pull from.
Swooping up and down and all these emotions going all over the place.
So your heroes really turned you on to what was possible with your voice through what?
Through vulnerability, hearing vulnerability in their voices. It's not like they had perfect technique. Like there's a perfect example of this in a Used song where Burt McCracken, I think the song is a box full of sharp objects, or box of sharp objects, or whatever it's called. And something was the best idea I ever had. Best idea I ever had! And he starts giving that breakup, like that wasn't a perfect example of it there with my voice. Yeah. But if you listen to that song, it's this vulnerability and this imperfection in his voice where he's singing a note and it starts to break up and it sounds like he's just, like his soul is dying. There's that angst there, and that's where that vulnerability lies. Because it's really emotion at the end of the day, right? Yeah. Screaming is not perfect technique and nailing exactly what you should be doing technique-wise. It's connecting to the emotion, the anger or the sadness or whatever emotion you're feeling and letting that out through the scream, because it's screaming at the end of the day. Like you want to be connected emotionally to it.
And that vulnerability is what shows us that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not about being right or being pro. It's about being a mess. It's about being vulnerable and sharing that messiness.
That's exactly it.
And so when you're screaming in particular, letting that come out is better for the scream long term. And I mean, I can hear that in your screams all day long. I mean, you hear those little cracks. You hear those things that I think people learning to scream would be afraid to do with their own voice because it doesn't sound good. But it's in the sounding bad, and leaning into that bad that you start to sound good because you're leaning into the feel, you're leaning into the emotion.
And it's about what the song calls for, what that section of the song, the emotion that it's calling for. If it calls for perfect technique in a way, you want your voice to sound, that's cool. But I guarantee you a lot of the time it's going to sound better if you let that vulnerable aspect of your voice come through and let your emotion shine through and let it be heard in the track.
So you were doing something earlier when you were warming up. You were, hey! Right.
Yeah.
Unpack that. So that's the first thing that you do when you start to get your screaming voice about you. And one of the first things that you were saying that you did in your car all those years ago, right?
Yep.
So when you're first starting to experiment with stuff, it didn't sound anywhere near as congruent and joined. What did it sound like when you were, if you remember, what did it feel like? What did it sound like when you first started?
It sounded like ass, and it's a good thing that nobody was around. Like, it sounded more like a dying cat, like we talk about.
Yeah.
Hey! Somewhere around there, and it was the placement was all wrong, and I was too pinched off and too tense. It should be more of a relaxed feeling, letting it flow through you, and finding that breaking point and leaning into the breaking point. Hey! And when you find it, that's where you want to push through, but while staying open. Hey!
Right.
When I'm screaming, it's a lot of the time just singing with heavy distortion on it, hitting a note or jumping around. Hey! Yeah!
But there's not so much, you're not going for a particular note, but there's always an element of pitch in there.
There's
your vocal
always
cords
an element
are always
of pitch.
engaged.
So the key is going into your head voice, finding that breaking point where that distortion starts to come in, and it may sound weird at first, but that's what you want to lean into. You don't want to shy away from that. You actually want to run towards it and lean into that. The hey! That's right where you're going to be hitting that perfect spot for screaming, that breakup in your voice right there. Figure out a way of bridging that hey, like we were talking about, the ha, 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 hey, 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 yeah! Ah, oh!
Hey! Ah, okay. Okay.
Yep.
So now we actually get to mess around with P1 track, Periphery track.
Light.
The end of it, and you're gonna get into the scream. And one thing I notice about that scream, as you've re-recorded it for me a couple times, and even on the original, you hear that vulnerability. You hear that crack at the very beginning. That
breaking point, that emotion in the voice.
Yeah. And it's like it's emotion, but it's also just it's mechanics too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
if we can join those together, I mean that's so strong, right?
Yeah.
So we get to hear you develop it now, redevelop it, which is going to be so awesome.
And hear how it sounds over the track with the music, with everything. See how everything works together. All right.
Hey! Just find a ray of light to amazing! Check. Just find a ray of light to amazing! Is the only way! Just find a ray of light to amazing! Is the only way! Just find a ray of light to amazing! Is the only way! See how I hit that note? Hey!
You've got a target note in there, right? Yeah.
The only way!
But you can't hear the note that well, or really at all.
You don't notice
the context.
it. You don't notice it until I'm taking the scream out of the context. Hey! Hey!
Right. You sound like an 80s rocker there, but while you're dialing it in, and even some of the stuff you were doing out here, right? There's that, but in the context, you don't hear that.
You can do it with any note. It doesn't have to be that note. Hey!
Hey! Just fire me, you'll learn to obey. Your sentence is the only way.
I love that even on the ones where you have it all together, you still hear that vulnerability. You still hear those little cracks.
Yeah, for sure.
So good. So we've been warming up, and you've been warming up, this morning a little bit. How long has it taken you to now get comfortable where you can do what you just did?
20, 30 minutes of, easing into it, starting with falsetto and then going through my normal scream warm-up and regular singing warm-up routine even. I won't touch screaming until I feel like my voice is at that point where it's ready to hit it. Like, you really want to... You can damage your voice very easily if you're not warmed up all the way with it. So you really want to, for me, it takes about 20 or 30 minutes before I can start really digging into screaming.
So remember, this is only the beginning. If you want to warm up with Spencer, see what he does to get his voice in shape for screaming, click the link below for his warm-ups for total destruction. It's free.
It's the only way!